There is a moment, and every species that has ever made contact with them describes it differently, but they all describe something where you stop thinking of humans as a problem to be managed. It happens fast. Faster than you expect. You are watching them lose, or bleed, or fall behind, and some part of your tactical brain is already composing the after-action report, already filing them under insufficient, already moving on, and then something shifts. Not in them. They were always like this. The shift is in you. You realize, with the particular cold horror of someone who has just stepped onto ice and heard it crack, that you have been misreading the situation from the very beginning. We called for help. The quorum sent out the distress signal on 11 frequencies. We were precise. We were formal. We followed every protocol the compact had established for requesting military assistance. We listed our losses. We listed our remaining assets. We listed, and this, I think, was our mistake, what we needed. Experienced combatants. Stable. Disciplined. Preferably from a species with a well-documented threat response threshold. Someone at the routing station must have laughed. Because what we got were humans. What follows is my operational log from the 41 days they were attached to our unit. Command has asked me to compile it. Command has also, separately, asked me not to share it. I am choosing to interpret these two requests as unrelated. I am Beth Oriuan, third assessor of the Quorum Tactical Division, and I have spent my career believing that war is a problem with solutions. I no longer believe that. I believe, now, that war is a condition and that humans are the only species that has ever felt at home inside it. This is what I saw. The first human arrived without her unit. I want to be precise about that, because it matters. The transport manifest listed 11 personnel. We were on the platform watching the dock seal, running the intake protocols, expecting 11 soldiers to walk off that ramp in some kind of formation, or at least, some kind of order, and what we got was one woman, a duffel bag that appeared to be held together by 3 strips of repair tape and, what I can only describe as optimism, and a note. The note was physical. Handwritten. On paper. Subcommander Ress picked it up with 2 fingers like it might be infectious. He was not entirely wrong to be cautious. I have since learned that humans sometimes do use paper that has been in contact with their skin oils for extended periods, and the biochemical implications of that alone kept our medic, Foreign, occupied for 3 days. But the note itself was benign. It read, in standard, delayed at Kepler 7 refuel. Reeves got here first because she never waits. Don't let her touch her comms equipment. Sergeant Nowak *, the human Reeves, was not reading the note. She was already at the viewport. Both hands pressed flat against the plasteel, looking out at the engagement zone. We were 300 kilometers above what remained of the Orith 7 surface installation, and the Harak were still burning pieces of it. You could see the light from there. Orange-white. Very bright. She watched it for 11 seconds. I counted because I did not know what else to do. Then, she turned around and said, "Okay. Who's got the current defensive perimeter map?" Her standard was unaccented. Flat. The kind of flat that is not neutral, it is the deliberate compression of something that wants to be louder. Subcommander Ress looked at me. I looked at Ress. Neither of us moved. "The map," she said again. Not louder. Just more present somehow, the way a frequency shifts before it becomes painful. I pulled up the tactical display. She crossed the room in 8 steps. I know it was 8 because I do this, I count things when I am processing. It is a functional habit. Foreign says it is a stress response, and I say Foreign should focus on his own stress responses, and she leaned over the projection, one hand on the console, and started tracing the Harak forward positions with her index finger. Not touching the controls. Just tracing. Like she was reading something written in a language she already knew. "This breach here," she said, pointing at the eastern corridor, Sector 14G, "how long has it been open?" 19 hours, Ress said. She didn't say anything. She made a sound. Not words, something shorter, lower, a sound my translation matrix could not categorize, which I noted because the matrix handles 47 languages including 3 that are primarily tonal. I filed it under Human Vocalization, Category, Assessment. I was wrong about the category. I would understand what it actually meant later. And, nobody's plugged it because every unit we send to 14G does not return, I said. She looked at me then. Direct eye contact, which I have learned since is a human dominance behavior but, is also, confusingly, a human intimacy behavior, and, the gap between those two functions has caused me significant analytical difficulty. Her eyes were dark brown. She had a scar that ran from her left eyebrow to her cheekbone, healed old and silver pale. She looked at me the way our senior cartographers look at a map that has an error in it, not angry, not alarmed, just noting. How many units? 4, I said. How were they equipped? Standard quorum assault loadout. Plasma repeaters, shield mesh, yeah. She straightened. Looked back at the map. That's why. I waited for her to explain. She did not explain. She walked to the corner of the room where her duffel bag was and unzipped it and began removing items and arranging them on the floor in a system I could not immediately decode. Foreign later suggested it was organized by retrieval priority. I think he is right. I think she had it sorted in her head before the bag was open. What I could see, 2 sidearms, a longer weapon that had been modified in at least 4 places I could identify and, probably more I couldn't, a medical kit, ration packs, a coil of something that was either cable or wire, a small rectangular device she set apart from everything else and did not explain, and, at the very bottom of the bag, a small paper photograph that she looked at for 1 second before tucking into the inner pocket of her jacket. I counted the items. 43. The duffel had seemed, from the outside, too small for 20. Ress cleared his throat. Sergeant Reeves. I want to establish operative, she said. Just Reeves is fine. Operative Reeves. I want to establish the scope of your deployment. You are attached in a support capacity. Your unit, once it arrives, will be operating under our command structure. You are here to assist us, not to sure, she said. Ress stopped. He had prepared more words. She had ended the conversation with sure in a way that was technically agreement and practically nothing. He looked at me again. I had no assistance to offer him. I was still cataloging the items on the floor. The Harak have been establishing forward positions for 72 hours, I said, because someone had to keep talking. They have 17 confirmed gunship units stationed along the inner belt. They have been targeting supply lines. The installation on Orath 7 was our primary fuel depot. Without it, you've got maybe 4 days of operational capacity, she said. Not a question. 3, I said. We revised the estimate this morning. She nodded once. She had picked up the small rectangular device and was doing something to it I could not see clearly. Her back was half turned. What's the terrain like in 14G? Corridor access. The breach opens into the old mining tunnels. The Harak have established, the terrain. She turned. Ceiling height. Surface type. Acoustic properties. I stared at her. Does sound echo in there, or does it die? I had the survey data. I had never looked at it in those terms. I pulled it up, ran the calculation I had never run, and said, the tunnels are carved from dense silicate rock. Very low acoustic absorption. Significant echo. Propagation distance of approximately 400 meters? I checked. 380. The sound she made this time, I filed differently. I filed it under confirmation, because that is what it was. She picked up the longer weapon and slung it across her back. She was moving toward the door when Ress said, Operative. You cannot go to 14G alone. Our protocols, I'm not going to 14G, she said. I'm going to 14F. 14F was the sector adjacent to the breach. It was not under direct Harak fire, which was the only reason we still held it. It was also, as far as our tactical analysis had determined, strategically irrelevant to the current engagement. Why, the door closed. Res and I stood in the silence she left behind. The viewport still showed Oreth 7 burning. The 43 items on the floor were arranged with the paper photograph absent, in her jacket pocket, and the small rectangular device also absent, in her hand when she left. She took the signal disruptor, Forin said from the back of the room. I had forgotten he was there. That small device. It's a Harak model signal disruptor. Modified. I recognized the casing. She has Harak equipment, Res said. She has modified Harak equipment, Forin said. Which means she has been in close enough contact with Harak technology to take one apart and put it back together differently. The Harak do not allow their equipment to be captured. Every unit is rigged for destruction on loss of containment. The fact that she had one meant she had gotten it before the containment protocol triggered, which meant she had been fast enough, or close enough, or I stopped that line of thinking. I went back to the tactical display and pulled up the 14F sensor feed. She appeared on it 11 minutes later. Moving along the eastern wall of the corridor, low, in a pattern that was not any movement protocol I recognized. She stopped at the junction point between 14F and the access tunnel that fed into 14G, and she did something with the disruptor that the sensor couldn't capture clearly, and then she was still. For 40 minutes she was still. Res said, twice, that we should recall her. I said, both times, that she had not given us a contact frequency, and we had not thought to ask, and that was our error to own. He did not appreciate that framing. At the 41-minute mark, there was a sound from 14G. The sensors picked it up as a pressure event, a large, fast, directed pressure event, which in practical terms meant an explosion, but the Harak gunship units in 14G were still showing on our tracking system, not destroyed, not repositioning, just panicking. That is the only word my matrix gave me. The Harak tactical movement patterns in 14G for the following 4 minutes were not advance, not retreat, not defensive formation. They were the movement patterns of units that have lost situational awareness and are responding to a threat they cannot locate. Reeves appeared back on the 14F sensor at minute 46. Walking. Not running. The disruptor was in her left hand. In her right hand was a component I could not immediately identify, which Forin later told me was a Harak targeting module, which should have been physically impossible to detach from its housing without the housing also destroying itself. She had apparently disagreed with that assessment. She came back to the command room, set the targeting module on the console next to the tactical display, and said, "The echo in those tunnels carries about 380, like you said. Harak echolocation-based targeting can't handle multi-directional pressure waves in an acoustic environment like that. They're essentially blind in there for the next 6 hours until the interference clears." She said this the way someone reports a weather forecast. Routine. Informational. We have a 6-hour window to re-establish the 14G corridor, she continued. If you want to use it. Res was gripping the edge of the console. His secondary pigmentation had gone a shade I had last seen on him during the provisional court hearing after the Yennik Station incident, which is to say, a shade associated, in our species, with the sensation of realizing you have been wrong about something important for a very long time. How did you know the Harak units in 14G were echolocation dependent? I asked. She shrugged. Most enclosed environment predators are. And, the Harak didn't evolve in open space, they evolved in cave systems. You can see it in how they build. The way they position those gunships? They're not watching the corridor. They're listening to it. She had been on this station for 53 minutes. She had been in this system for less than 3 hours. I pulled up the Quorum Xenobiology database on Harak sensory systems. The echolocation dependency was in there. Page 47 of the tactical appendix. Classified level 3, which meant I had clearance, which meant I had access, which meant I had never looked at it because it had been filed under biological curiosity rather than tactical relevance, and I, a third assessor of the tactical division, had not thought to wonder whether the enemy's biology was something I should know. She had figured it out from the way they arranged furniture. I stared at the targeting module on the console. It had a scratch on the upper casing, long and diagonal, that looked like it had been made by a blade removing it from the housing rather than detonating it. The scratch was deliberate. Controlled. Someone had known exactly where to cut. I did not look at Reeves. I looked at the targeting module for quite a long time. "I'll need 2 of your people for the corridor push," she said. "Whoever you can spare. And if someone has a map of the silicate composition in sectors 12 through 16, that would help." "Help with what?" Ress asked. She picked up her bag and slung it over one shoulder. "Finding the other places they can't hear us coming." She went to the bunk room without waiting for an answer. Ress and I stood in the command room with a 6-hour tactical window we hadn't had an hour ago, a targeting module that shouldn't exist, and the quiet, accumulating sense that we had been preparing for the wrong kind of war. The rest of her unit arrived 4 hours later. 10 more humans. I had, by then, revised my intake assessment form significantly. Where the original form had a field labeled threat level, incoming asset, I had added a second field. I labeled it recalibration required. It did not feel like enough. The second human who unsettled me was not Reeves. This surprised me. By the time the rest of the unit arrived, I had already begun constructing a category in my operational taxonomy specifically for Reeves, a narrow, precise category, labeled something like exceptional individual, not representative of species, because that is what you do when you encounter data that does not fit your models. You isolate it. You call it an outlier. You protect the model. Sergeant Nowak broke the model in a different way, and I did not see it coming because he did it quietly. He was not physically imposing. Reeves had the kind of build that my species would associate with someone who had survived repeated physical trauma, compact, dense, the muscle distribution of something that has learned to expect impact. Nowak was taller, leaner, the kind of lean that looked like it had been interrupted by meals that didn't always happen. He had the most unremarkable face I have encountered in my career. If you asked me to reconstruct it from memory, I could give you only general principles: eyes, nose, mouth, expression of mild attention. He was the kind of person who entered a room and the room did not notice. I noticed, later, that this was on purpose. He arrived with the unit, did the intake processing, found a corner, and immediately began reading a physical document again with the paper that appeared to be some kind of manual. I assumed it was a weapon system guide or tactical reference. Foreign, who has a longer reach than his frame suggests and considerably less professional restraint than his title implies, confirmed 3 days later that it was a book about the flowering plants of Earth's northern temperate regions. He was reading a plant encyclopedia in the middle of a contested tactical installation. I filed this under anomalous behavior and left it there, because I had other problems. The other problems were the Harak. After Reeves's disruption of the 14G corridor, we had recovered the sector and pushed the Harak line back approximately 40 kilometers. This was the most ground we had gained in 6 weeks. Command was, predictably, enthusiastic. Command sent a commendation. Command also sent updated orders that reflected a level of optimism I found concerning, because the orders assumed the Harak would continue to behave in the ways they had been behaving before a human arrived and spent 40 minutes in a tunnel doing something that caused their units to lose situational awareness for 6 hours. The Harak did not cooperate with this assumption. They adapted. Within 36 hours of the 14G incident, the Harak forward units had begun deploying in different formations. Smaller groupings. Less dependence on the corridor approach. They had also, and this was the part that kept me up, metaphorically speaking, because my species does not sleep in the human sense but we have an equivalent cognitive rest state that I was not achieving, they had also changed their acoustic behavior. Where they had previously moved with normal operational sound discipline, they were now generating constant low-level noise. Deliberately. Filling the acoustic environment so that an echolocation-dependent sensory system would receive nothing but undifferentiated interference. They were jamming their own hearing to prevent it from being weaponized against them. Reeves sat with me in the command room when I presented this analysis. She was cleaning one of her weapons, which she did every morning with the methodical attention of someone who has learned that the alternative is worse, and she listened to the full briefing without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Yeah. About 48 hours, that's about right. You expected this." "I expected something. They're not stupid." She reassembled the sidearm with the smooth, inattentive motion of someone doing something their hands remember better than their brain does. "We got one play out of the acoustics. Maybe two, in different configurations. But it's not a strategy, it's a technique." "What's the strategy?" Ress asked from across the room. She looked at him. "Don't have one yet." Ress processed this with approximately the same expression he had worn during the Yenix Station hearing, the one that preceded him having to explain to the provisional court why the alternative had been worse. He was developing, I noted, a specific face for human interactions. I was developing one too, probably. This is when Nowak appeared in the doorway. He had the plant encyclopedia under his arm. He said, "Can I see the geological survey data for the Harak's current forward position?" I looked at him. "The geological survey?" "Yeah. Rock composition, soil strata, groundwater tables if we have them." We had them. We had them because thorough pre-engagement environmental documentation is standard quorum protocol, and I had been a thorough assessor for 11 years and I had never once found the groundwater tables tactically significant. I pulled them up. Nowak crossed the room and studied them for 4 minutes. He had a very particular way of looking at data, still, unhurried, the way a predator holds before it moves, and Foreign told me later that he had been watching from the corridor and found it more uncomfortable than watching Reeves operate, because Reeves looked like she was about to do something and you could prepare yourself, whereas Nowak looked like he was already done and just hadn't told you yet. "The Harak dug in on silicate bedrock," he said. "Mostly. But their northeastern flank is on a clay-heavy substrate. See this layer, about 12 meters down?" He pointed at the survey. "That's not load-bearing. If you get significant water movement through it, there is no significant water movement in that region," I said. "This is a dry geological zone. Currently," he said. I waited. "Their forward fuel depot is venting coolant," he said. "We've got the thermal readings, I pulled them this morning. The coolant is partly water-based. It's been running into the substrate for," he checked a small device on his wrist, "about 18 hours now. At the current rate, that northeastern clay layer will hit saturation in another 6 to 8 hours. He said this like he was reporting something that had already happened. "At saturation," he continued, "anything sitting on top of it is sitting on something with the structural load capacity of wet construction material from a primitive building period. I think your closest equivalent would be," he paused, "did some internal calculation, something that compresses under approximately 30 times its own weight. The Harak's forward bunker installation's mass approximately 45 times that. Per unit." Silence. "The northeastern flank," Ress said slowly, "is where they moved their heaviest emplacements after the 14G incident." "Yeah," Nowak said. He said it the way you say yes to a question you were asked 3 sentences ago. I looked at the survey data. Then, at the thermal readings. Then, at the timeline Nowak had laid out, which used only information that had been available to us for hours, arranged in a sequence that I had not assembled because I had not thought to connect geological survey data to thermal runoff from an enemy depot to structural load capacity of military installations. "How did you?" I stopped. "Start it again. What made you look at the groundwater tables?" He shrugged. He actually shrugged, the human gesture of minimization that I have come to understand as deeply deceptive in its casualness. "The survey said clay substrate in the northeast. Clay does things when it gets wet. I figured it was worth checking whether anything was getting it wet." He looked down at the plant encyclopedia under his arm. Something in his expression shifted, not much, just enough to be visible if you were already watching his face, which I was. "Back home we had this saying about farmers. You want to know what land is going to do, you ask the person who's been looking at it every day for 20 years. Nobody knows terrain like the people who live on it." He paused. The Harak have been on that flank for 6 days. They haven't been looking at what's underneath them. He went back to the doorway, stopped. 6 hours. Probably 6.5. He left. Reeves hadn't looked up from the weapon she was cleaning. He does that, she said. Does what? I said. Finds the thing nobody's looking at. She slotted a component into place. The click was very precise. Nowak's been doing it since I've known him. Back at Kepler 7 he figured out the Harak were going to cut our supply line 48 hours before they did because he noticed their patrol intervals had changed in a way that made sense if they were pre-positioning for an ambush. Nobody else saw it. He wrote it in the margins of the duty roster. She set the weapon down. Nobody read the margins. And, you believed him, I said. I believe him when he says I think something, and I believe him more when he goes quiet. She picked up the weapon again. When Nowak goes quiet, it means he already knows and he's just waiting for the rest of the situation to catch up. 6 hours and 19 minutes later, the northeastern flank of the Harak forward position subsided. Not collapsed, subsided. Slowly, over about 40 minutes, the clay substrate gave way and the heavy emplacements on the northeastern flank sank, tilted, and became tactically unusable without the Harak firing a single round or us doing anything except watching the thermal feed and the geological data and waiting. 3 Harak bunker units were buried. 4 more had to be abandoned. The defensive line on the northeastern flank compressed by 60 kilometers in a morning, without engagement, without loss, without any action beyond Nowak reading a geological survey at 0600 and a fuel depot that had been venting coolant into the ground for 18 hours before anyone thought to ask why that mattered. Res filed a tactical report calling it an opportunistic exploitation of environmental conditions. He is not wrong. He is also not entirely right. There is a difference between an opportunity and the ability to see it before it exists. I know what the Quorum xenobiology files say about humans. I have read them more thoroughly since Reeves arrived. They say, Homo sapiens demonstrate adaptive problem-solving consistent with generalist survival pressures. They say, tool use is culturally transmitted rather than instinctual. They say, social cohesion may enable coordinated response to complex threats. They say this in the tone of someone describing a moderately interesting geological feature. The files do not say, Nowak sat in a corner reading a plant encyclopedia in the middle of a war and spent the morning connecting dots we did not know were dots and the result was 60 kilometers of defensive line and no casualties and the Harak do not know what happened to them yet. That is not a file anyone wrote. That is not a category anyone made. I made one. In my operational taxonomy, in the section I had been quietly building since Reeves arrived, I added a field below recalibration required. I labeled it, they are not solving problems we present to them. They are solving problems we do not know we have. I stared at it for a while. I added a note, check for more problems we do not know we have. Then I went to find Nowak and ask what else he had noticed that he hadn't mentioned yet. He was in the corridor outside the command room, back against the wall, the plant encyclopedia open on his knee. He was on a page showing something called Epilobium angustifolium, which he told me, without my asking, was a plant that grew specifically in areas that had recently been burned. First thing back. Before everything else. Fireweed, he said. That's what they call it. I looked at the picture. Small, green, with narrow pink flowers. It grows in burned places, I said. Only in burned places. He turned the page. It needs the disruption. Without the fire, the seeds don't germinate. The whole plant is designed for aftermath. He said this and went back to reading and did not explain why he was telling me this, which meant he thought I could figure it out, which I eventually did, lying in my rest state that night, not resting. The Harak had been burning our installations for 6 weeks. Nowak had spent 3 days looking at what was growing in the aftermath. Tomorrow he would tell us what he'd found. I was certain of it. I was also certain, and this certainty had a quality I had not experienced in my 11 years as a tactical assessor, a quality that was not quite comfort but was adjacent to it, that when he told us, it would change something. I just did not know yet what. On day 19, the Harak stopped adapting. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because it was not immediately obvious. The HFY are not stupid. I have said this already and I will say it again because I think it matters, because understanding what happened requires understanding that what they ran into was not a superior force in the conventional sense. They ran into something they did not have a model for. The distinction is important. You can prepare for a superior force. You prepare differently, you reallocate resources, you adjust your doctrine. The HFY military doctrine is 3,000 years old and it has survived contact with 17 species and it is, by any rigorous analysis, one of the most efficient warfighting frameworks in this sector. 3,000 years of doctrine stopped adapting on day 19. I know the moment it happened. I have the sensor records. I have been looking at them for weeks. It happened when Corporal Ferreira sang. I need to document this accurately, because when I include it in the official report, and I will include it, because the official report is supposed to be accurate and because I have made a private resolution that I will not write a report that makes this war legible by removing the parts that are hardest to explain, I need it to be precise. Ferreira was the unit's medic. She was 26 years old by human reckoning, which is young by any reckoning, and she had the particular manner of someone who has been doing her job long enough to be competent and not long enough to be detached. She treated the wounded ours and theirs, which I will get to, with the same focused attention she gave everything, and she hummed while she worked. Not always. But, when the work was difficult, or when a patient was frightened, she would hum something low and repetitive, and, once in a while she would let it become actual sound. On day 19, we had 3 HFY prisoners. We had not intended to have HFY prisoners. The HFY do not typically surrender. This is documented, understood, tactically accounted for in all quorum engagement protocols. What had happened was that Reeves and 2 of the human unit had entered a compromised HFY forward position ahead of a structural collapse, the consequence of NOAC's ongoing environmental analysis, which had by this point produced 4 separate tactical advantages from data we had possessed for weeks and never used, and they had found a HFY fireteam trapped under rubble. Not dead. Trapped. Reeves had called for Ferreira. Ress had called for me. I had arrived to find Reeves sitting on a piece of collapsed ceiling material, eating a ration bar, watching Ferreira and the 2 other humans work to remove debris from a HFY soldier who was, by every physiological indicator available to me, about to cease functioning. The HFY was also attempting to scratch Ferreira. Its claws were not well positioned for this given that one forearm was pinned, but the attempt was consistent. Should we be? I started. Shoo, Reeves said. She was watching Ferreira the way I had seen her watch the tactical display. Ferreira was talking to the HFY. Not in standard, the HFY do not use standard and have declined to learn it in some kind of continuous low vocalization that was not language in any sense the translation matrix could process, that was more like sound itself, shaped by proximity and repetition into something that had a quality of presence without content. She was explaining nothing. She was promising nothing. She was just there, in the rubble, next to a creature that was trying to scratch her, making a sound. The HFY stopped trying to scratch her approximately 90 seconds in. I noted the time. I am noting it now. 90 seconds. Ferreira worked for 22 more minutes to free the 3 HFY soldiers. She worked on the worst injured one first, which I also noted, because the tactical value of prioritizing the most critical patient when you are operating in a contested zone with incomplete information about further structural stability is not obvious. The medic who prioritizes the hardest case first, in conditions like those, is making a choice that is not primarily tactical. I did not have a category for that choice. I still don't. I have been trying to construct one for 19 days. The 3 HFY were brought back to the installation. Foreign stabilized 2 of them. The third, the worst injured, required a kind of surgical intervention that our medical bay was equipped for but that Foreign had never performed on a HFY physiology, and he said so, and Ferreira said, "Walk me through what you know about their cardiovascular system," and Foreign looked at her with an expression I recognized as his version of the face I make when reality is not cooperating with my prior assessments, and she said, "I'm serious, I'll do it, I just need the physiology." And Foreign walked her through it and she did it. She did it in 41 minutes. The HFY soldier survived. I want to be clear, the Harak soldier survived. This is not a small thing. This is not incidental. This is a member of the species that had been systematically destroying our installations for 6 weeks, recovered from near-fatal injury by a human medic who had never studied their physiology, who asked for a briefing and, then, operated, in a medical bay that had not been designed for them, in conditions that were still not entirely secure. When the Harak soldier was conscious enough to process inputs, it looked at Ferreira. Ferreira was writing something in a small paper notebook, the humans and their paper, always paper, and she looked up and said, "Hey. You're okay." The translation matrix gave me the standard. I don't know what she said in the Harak's language. I don't know if she said anything that made cognitive sense to it. I know the tone she said it in. I know the soldier looked at her for 11 seconds, I counted, I always count, and then looked away and did not try to scratch anyone again. This is the moment on the sensor records. This exact moment. Because what I did not know yet, and did not find out until later, was that we had positioned a monitoring sensor in the medical bay's standard security protocol for prisoner housing, and the Harak prisoners could see the monitoring sensor, and the Harak had a communication method I had not fully understood until Foreign explained it to me, a low-frequency vibration produced in the chest cavity, inaudible to most species including ours, which they use for short-range signaling. The 3 Harak prisoners had been signaling since they were conscious enough to do so. To the forward units. Through the installation walls, at a frequency that passed through silicate composite construction material without significant attenuation. We had not been jamming it because we had not known to jam it. They had been sending information. What information, exactly, I cannot say with certainty. The Harak signal encoding for this frequency band is not fully decrypted. But, I have the pattern data. And, the pattern changed on day 19, at the moment Ferreira said, "Hey, you're okay," in a room with a Harak soldier who had been trying to scratch her 22 minutes ago. The signal pattern changed and, the Harak forward line stopped advancing. It did not retreat. It stopped. Held in place. For 2 days. Which, in the tactical arithmetic of the previous 6 weeks, was functionally the same as retreat. Because every hour the Harak didn't move was an hour we could use to reconstruct supply lines and rotate wounded out and shore up the positions Nowak had been quietly identifying as vulnerable before the Harak could exploit them. 2 days became 4. 4 became 8. Res presented a briefing suggesting the Harak had encountered supply difficulties. He is not wrong. They may have. But, supply difficulties do not produce the specific signal pattern change I observed, and, supply difficulties do not correlate with the moment a human medic looked at an enemy soldier and said you're okay after spending 41 minutes keeping it alive. I do not know what the prisoners told their forward units. I have theories. My most persistent theory is that they said something true, in the only way available to them, about what they had seen. That the information the Harak military doctrine was not equipped to process was not tactical. Not a new weapon system. Not an environmental vulnerability. Not an acoustic blind spot. The information was, they kept us alive, and they didn't have to, and we don't know why 3,000 years of Harak military doctrine has a response to superior force. It has a response to deception. It has a response to ambush, to attrition, to resource denial, to tactical innovation. I have reviewed the available scholarship on Harak strategic culture. I have found no response codified for the enemy helped us when we were helpless and they had nothing to gain from it. That gap, that absence, is what stopped the line. Not for long. War doesn't stop for philosophical confusion, not permanently. The Harak would recalibrate eventually. They would find a frame that fit. They would keep fighting. I knew this then, and I know it now. But, it stopped. For 8 days it stopped, and, in those 8 days we rebuilt the supply corridor. In those 8 days the fuel depot on Orith 7 was partially reconstructed. In those 8 days 3 Harak soldiers who should have died in a structural collapse were alive and functional, and, one of them, on day 6, ate the ration bar that Ferreira left near its recovery station. I did not see who left the ration bar. The sensor footage shows a hand human proportioned, no identifying marks, placing it near the station and withdrawing. I have not asked. I do not think I need to ask. On day 27, Reeves told me the unit's deployment was ending. She said it in the command room, early in the morning cycle, before anyone else was present, while I was running my count. I count things. I have mentioned this, it is a habit. Foreign calls it a stress response. I have stopped arguing with him, running my count of the tactical variables I track at the start of each day, which had by this point expanded significantly beyond its original parameters because I had been adding fields. I had been adding fields constantly. Every time I thought I had the correct set of variables, one of them did something that required a new field. I had 23 fields now. 11 of them were labeled with notes I did not know how to formalize. Reeves sat in the chair across from me and said, "We're being reassigned." "Where?" I said. "Can't say." She said it without apology, not evasive, just factual. Standard. I looked at the tactical display. The Harak line. The rebuilt supply corridor. The northeastern flank, still subsided, now partially built over by Harak units that had moved to compensate and were, per Nowak's latest analysis filed yesterday evening, in the margins of a duty roster in the process of making a structural error that would not be apparent for another 4 days. Nowak had already left a note. "The 3 prisoners," I said. "When you leave, they stay with you until the compact negotiates return terms. Standard prisoner protocol." She paused. Ferreira already arranged it with foreign. Dietary requirements, medical monitoring. She wrote it all down. She wrote it all down, of course she did, on paper, in a notebook, in handwriting that foreign says is extremely difficult to read but worth the effort. "Will you?" I stopped. Reeves waited. She does this, she waits, without pressure, which is its own kind of pressure, the kind that makes you finish the sentence you started. "Will your species, do you think the quorum will?" I stopped again. I was reaching for a concept my language handles poorly, which is to say a concept about the future, specifically about futures that are not predictions or plans but something more like a weight that settles. The quorum has a word for the moment you realize a situation has permanently changed, velahan. The permanent rearrangement. The tile that cannot be put back. I had been having velahan at a rate my cognitive architecture was not designed to sustain. "I think," Reeves said carefully, "that the compact is figuring out what to do with us. Same as everyone else. What would you tell them? If you were advising them?" She was quiet for a moment. Long enough that I looked up from the display. "I'd tell them to read the margins," she said. She left at 0800. The unit left with her 10 humans, 1 plant encyclopedia, 43 items in a duffel bag minus the photograph which was still in Ferreira's jacket pocket, minus a ration bar which was somewhere in the recovery station of a Harak prisoner, minus a targeting module that was now in my desk drawer because I had not returned it and no one had asked. I did not watch the transport leave. I was at the tactical display. Adding a field. I labeled it, "What they don't see is significant." I added a subnote, "Everything." I have been in tactical assessment for 11 years. I have written 42 operational reports. They have all been, in retrospect, descriptions of the surface of things, the positions, the resources, the movements. The parts you can count. The 3 Harak prisoners were still in the medical bay. The worst injured one, the one Ferreira had operated on, had, on day 24, scratched something into the wall near its recovery station. Not deep. A few centimeters of claw against composite material. Foreign showed me. It was a shape. Curved lines, 3 of them, that Foreign said corresponded to a Harak glyph, not common script, archaic, a ceremonial register their species still uses for significant events but not for ordinary communication. He translated it as witnessed and carried. I did not include this in the official report. I included it in my personal log, which I am writing now, which I think of as the other document, the one where I put the fields I cannot formalize. Witnessed and carried *. I have a theory about what the Harak thinks it saw. I have a theory about why it stopped the line. My theory is this: the Harak military doctrine has no response for an enemy that doesn't need you to be harmless before it treats you with care. Every framework I know, quorum, Harak, compact, all 17 species I have studied, has some version of the same equation. You extend care to something when the threat is neutralized. When the claws are gone. When the danger has passed. Ferreira worked on the Harak while it was still trying to scratch her. The Harak soldier scratched, witnessed, and carried into the wall. The Harak forward line stopped for 8 days. I do not fully understand the chain of causation. I am not certain I have the cognitive apparatus to understand it, not because I am unintelligent, but because the logic involved is not the logic my species or any species I know was built for. It is a logic that, as far as I can tell, only emerges when you come from a planet that has been trying to kill you for several million years and you decide, at some point, that the answer to that is not to become harder. The answer, apparently, is something else. I am still working on the correct field label. The Harak on the recovery station ate the ration bar. That is where I will end this log. Not at the departure, not at the tactical summary, not at the 8 days of rebuilt supply lines. Here. At the image I cannot get out of my processing loops, a Harak soldier, who should be dead, who tried to scratch a medic, who received no explanation, eating a ration bar in a Quorum medical bay because a human left it there. The Harak has 3,000 years of doctrine. The human had a ration bar and a notebook and 41 minutes. I have added one more field to my taxonomy. The last one. I have decided not to add any more after this one because I think this is the correct stopping point, the place where assessment ends and something else begins. The field reads, * they came when we called. We asked for soldiers. We got something we don't have a word for yet, *. The subnote reads, find the word, I'm working on it.